Hello, folks. This is Steve Marinucci, Beatles Examiner, welcoming you to another Things We Said Today, our weekly discussion of the Beatle world and Beatle things and whatever Beatle things we can figure out. Let me introduce who's with us today. We're actually one short. Ken is not with us today, but I have on the other side of the world, actually the other side of the country, Mr. Allan Kozin, our musicologist. Good evening, Allan.
Hello, Steve. Hello, everyone.
And also on the East Coast from Beatle Fan Magazine, Mr. Al Sussman. Good evening, Al.
Hi, Steve. Hello there, everybody.
And we have a special guest actually back out here in California, our good friend, Mr. Dave Morrell, who has just published a second volume of his memoirs called and I'm reaching for it, 1974, The Promotion Man, New York City, and he is with us on the line. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, everybody. It's really an honor and a pleasure. I've followed you guys for a long, long time, and it's a great thrill to be a guest on the show. Thank you.
Great to have you.
Great, yeah, it's really great to have you. I read through the book, and the stories are really fantastic. Obviously, the Beatles stories are the real attraction, as far as we're concerned too. But give everybody a rundown. I mean, since this is the second book of your archives.
Yeah, I'll tell you real quickly. I looked through some notes and pieces of papers and ticket stubs and diaries and photographs and all kinds of stuff that came back to me. Actually, it was like cosmic debris that floated back to me, and it really started to begin to make sense. I sat down as an older man now in my 60s and looked at these objects and sort of pontificated to myself about them all. And then I created a puzzle on the table that said, this is an interesting story from the time I left high school, listened to John and Yoko, who had moved to America, go on the radio and be accessible. And I followed it all the time, whatever they were up to, whatever songs they were talking about, till finally when the phones were opening, I would try to reach them and get through, and I did. And that was so much fun. And that really opened up the floodgates when the disc jockey, Howard Smith, had me on the radio, because it wasn't about me. It was about the ability to have this free-form radio play bootlegs and tapes that, when you listen to me on the radio, then I didn't know what they were even. But it brought together a unit of people that was bigger than the DJ ever imagined. The mail was beyond coming into him from Beatle collectors saying, wow, I do this again. And this grew where, I began a relationship with my whole story of meeting John Lennon and bringing him the Yellow Matter Custard bootleg album, which certainly I had no clue where these songs were from. So that was an exciting time to be able to be that guy. Could have been anybody, could have been any of us that did that. I just got really lucky by writing a letter to a DJ who then in turn showed it to John, and within days I was in front of him and meeting him. But this really led to where this went, which was all great Beatle collectors: John Overall, Keith, Ron, Fermanagh. I'd say Keith's last name, but that's a tough one to pronounce, and forgive me, Keith, you're part of the team. But
should I give it a try, Sluchansky?
Yeah. He's an incredible guy, as we all know, and what he's gone through. He's an icon in my book, and one of the toughest men that ever walked the planet. I love him. So all of us really got together in those early days and began our journey around the Greenwich Village, antique stores, record stores, bookstores, secondhand stores, used record shops. We found our way down the Canal Street, and we were uncovering all kinds of Beatle memorabilia. And what I think was really fun, for instance, to give you an example, and we've all lived this, was when John played at Madison Square Garden for the 1-to-1 benefit concert, because we had already started now a Beatles for sale, a memorabilia thing, Ron and I. And from being on the radio, the mail was so excessive that I had to go from a little post office slot to a big box. We were getting tons of letters. and having a ball with it and coming up with a little catalog. We were selling everything. Ron knew where to get the oldie singles, which, let me tell you a quick story about that as we roll into my story. This is not in my book. It's a wonderful story, though. You know, Ron being from New Jersey, I'm from New Jersey. It's just so far you can go on a bicycle to find record stores. And Ron, you know, had his father drive him around. And of course, Al will remember this, in Hackensack.
Absolutely.
There was a store that was like a doo-wop store.
The Relic Rack.
And it turns out, this is all new to me as the future rolled out, but the Capitol Records branch managers, like Dominic, you know, Sorori, you know, one of these, and he loved doo-wops. That was his scene. So he would stop over there and drop off all the new records, Beatle records, and, of course, and drop them off there in exchange for these doo-wop records. So Ron would walk in and he realized this. He was a teenager, a young teenager, most emphasis on that. And he figured out that a lot of these hard-to-get Beatles singles with picture covers were at this shop. And he realized when he looked underneath where you're not supposed to look, where the overstock is, that there were more. So he got in real action, and he went to Willowbrook and he found a box of Elvis Christmas albums on the original RCA label for $1 each in the cutout bin. And he begged his mother for $100 and bought 100 of them and rolled them over to Relic Rack and exchanged it for all these Beatles singles with picture covers. Now, if many of you or none of you have had the experience of meeting Ron and going to his home, I could tell you what a charitable man he is, was, and will always be. It's part of his character. And I know when I went there, I was humbled, and because I didn't have much of a Beatle collection, even though they were showing off this guy named Dave with this Beatle collection. You know, it was silly and fun, and that's what I'm all about. So when Ron saw all my stuff, he said, geez, you're missing there's about 20 Beatles singles. I think you're missing 16 sleeves. He says, but wait right here. And he handed me every one of them in perfect shape. I said, I don't have money for this. He says, no, I want you to have this to complete your collection. It's on me. And he was always like that to other people along his journey. So Ron, you know, really connected well, and this gave us overstock to get our collections, excessive amounts of records that we could sell and make some money and have some fun with this. But on the one-to-one benefit concert was so much fun about that was a couple of things. One in particular was here we are, all of us that are on this phone today, had the opportunity perhaps to see this show. And being a collector of the Beatles, we certainly must have thought to ourselves, what's he going to wear? What guitar is he going to play? Will he do any Beatles songs? What songs would he do? You know, all of these things were really mind-boggling to us. And so by being in New York City, having that opportunity and going to the shows, we're able to write down all the songs. We're able to tape record the songs. We're able to take photographs of John that nobody had. And Ron, always the man to take it to the next stage. He was a classic at this stuff. And recently, a week ago, he was over my house here, and he said, Dave, put this DVD on, and it was Elvis in June of '72. Ron loved Elvis. He loved Las Vegas Elvis, and he offered me a ticket to go see the King. So I went with Ron to see Elvis, and Ron brought an 8mm camera and filmed it. And he synced the sound up to the Live at the Madison Square Garden album, and it was gorgeous. And he was here last week with over 35 minutes of Elvis footage that no one's seen that he synced up. So the fast forward, when we go to the one-to-one benefit concert, Ron decided this time he was a little shaky, he thought, at the Elvis one. He was a little shaky with the 8mm. So he brought in a tripod, and he had it taped to his leg. And so when we got to our seats, he hooked up a tripod and put the camera on it. And now he has this absolutely stunning primo footage of John Lennon that no one's ever seen before. And one of the things that Ron and I are doing together, I'll go official with this today, is that we're happy we got a little room to move. But we've been working diligently and very hard on a terrific fan book about the one-to-one benefit concerts, because we were there. We've got photographs people haven't seen, over 80 photographs people haven't seen, some live footage people haven't seen, and a great story. Let me share this with you. in my meetings with John Lennon, as you guys know, I got to get the Beatle Butcher cover, and one of the things that Ron and I did was we made T-shirts of the Beatle Butcher cover, and we were going to sell them at the one-to-one benefit concert. So we had to hand make these shirts in Ron's basement, and it was just right out of the Three Stooges and Abbott and Costello and Laurel and Hardy. We were paint all over us, and this thing was expensive, and we were wasting T-shirts. Maybe 2 out of 10 would make it, to a hanger. It was really something else, fellas. And we started to wear these, and one time I run into Mark Bolan from T-Rex, and it's warm out because it was the summertime, and I'm wearing just my Beatle Butcher cover, and he's in a T-shirt, and Mark Bolan's wearing his gold lame sports coat, and he goes, "Hey, where'd you get that shirt?" And I said, "Wow, you handmade it." He goes, "Oh man, I'll trade it for you for my coat."
Wow.
So of course I tried to put on his coat, and it came, he was about 5'2" and I was 6'1", so it was a really silly moment. And a month after the concert, believe it or not, I got a photograph. One of the few. I've got a few of me with John, and this one's with me and John and Yoko, and I'm actually wearing the Butcher cover T-shirt too. But anyway, we go to get a peddler's license to peddle these things, and that was a story and a half and a lot of fun. Getting Ron online to get a license is crazy, man. And he was underage, but we got our license, and the day of the show, we're selling the T-shirts in between. And the police said, when you get inside, do not sell anything. And we said, okay, we won't. And so the show's about to start. Ron has never seen any of the Beatles. And all of a sudden, power to the people. It's just about to go down. And some kid goes, "Hey, I'd like to buy a shirt." And I said, "Ron, don't do it." And he did. And the cop caught him and pulled him out right when John was hitting the stage. Ron's in Beatle jail. Poor Ron. So I said, "I'll go get him when Yoko sings." So I had to wait a couple of songs, and then I raced down to get him. So it was really fun. But anyway, so the first book was really about what it was like to be at Ground Zero on the radio and meet and greet all these other Beatle collectors. And we all gathered we had one friend in New York City, John Overall. We'd always go to his house, and he had all foreign records. And this led to getting Shindig films and getting the Beatles at Washington Coliseum. A fellow by the name of Jerry Marsden, just like Jerry and the Pacemakers, wrote to me at that post office box saying that he had a print of it and he had the negative of it. And, we were kids, but we ended up with that. And Ron would show it around, and we'd show it to all the artists. And in my career in the music business with Ron, before that came out, we'd show that to Springsteen, Ray Davies, Ray Manzarek. We did it with we did it with all the big British, Rod Stewart. We did it with everybody. It was so much fun. Now, so book one really is all about collecting and our lives of growing up. What's interesting is as we all spread, I got a job through Ron Fermanack to work at a branch called Warner Electra Atlantic Records, which was a big warehouse full of records. And I started in the warehouse, in the low job that everybody would start at.
Hey, Dave.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Before you go too much further, you should actually mention the name of the first volume of the book.
Horse Dog.
Yes.
I called it Horse Dog because I thought it was clever, funny, and it would be in Funk and Wagnall's dictionary immediately. 2 years later, I can't get off. It was a bad start, tough name. Nobody gets it. I gotta own that. I do. I gotta chew down on it. It's called Horse Dog, and I love it. And I went to my sales department today, which is me in front of my computer, and it actually is selling. I'm absolutely delighted, and commented not under my breath to a group of people that, wow, look what's happening. So I'm really thrilled that it's selling, that it did well, that my English teacher, who's long been dead, she was about 118 when she taught me, didn't send it back to me with a C- and say, "Don't try this again, Morrell." So I'm pleased about that. And what really worked for the book was about the stories and the factual part of those. I think that really drove that book. So I'm thrilled about that. And real quick, the book ends where I'm working in the warehouse of the record company. But just to catch us up, here's me. I get in the record business for 40-some years. I'm still here. Ron, he went on to do This Is Elvis, The Kids Are All Right, Imagine, the Beatles Anthology, 200 Capitol Collector Series CDs, Grammy nomination with the Les Paul box set. it's unbelievable what he has accomplished. And if you look at Keith, here's a kid who spent his days running around the village and everywhere finding records, and he ends up with his own record shop on 8th Street, which was, Casablanca, the Casbah for the meals, where you got your sandals, your incense, your pizza, your pot, everything you desired was on 8th Street, man. The girls were there, the fringe jackets were there, the Beatles booths were there, and Electric Ladyland was across the street.
Right.
And there were many times in Keith's store, I'll just drop this one on you, where I don't want to say her name, worked at Electric Lady, and she'd see the light burning across the street on the 2nd floor, and would come over at 2:30 in the morning and say, hey, Jeff Beck just left. He was working over at Electric Lady. You want to come back and hear the tapes? And we'd rush right over.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Oh, my.
And then I'll wrap this up before we chat and open it up for you guys. I'm sorry I'm talking so much. Is that my
that's right.
Is 1974, The Promotion Man, New York City. And it's really a book about a young kid getting into New York City, getting a job, finding his feet on the streets of New York, and how to get to where things are, and how the whole turf and grid of New York works. And one of the toughest jobs in the world, getting records played. Tough bunch of goons I had to work with, who were other promotion men. And delightful that I had the opportunity to be so young and given such a great chance. And of course, in the second book, when things got tough and I needed to lean on my moral upbringing, my sounds and my emotions, I'd always lean on the Beatles. And of course, John being in New York led me to run into John in such a outpouring of positive emotions coming from John, and creativity, from the Walls and Bridges to the rock and roll album, to being with him on his birthday, to seeing him perform at Madison Square Garden, and then wrapping it up at the end of the year in California. It was unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Al, you want to ask something?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, Dave and I have kind of a similar history because we both spent a lot of time in the late 60s and early 70s hanging out in various and sundry record stores, not just in the Village, but also in North Jersey. And in fact, every once in a while, Dave will suddenly pop up on my Facebook page with an old survey from Corvettes or Gimbals or one of those places that are really fascinating to look at. But give us just kind of a picture, because, this is 41 years ago we're talking. And give us a picture of what the record business was like, the record business and the record industry was like in 1974, because it was kind of like the Wild West. It was like anything goes.
And it was,
I found it to be very difficult personally for my ears for one reason. We had all moved over to FM, where the DJs weren't stepping on the intros and the outros to the records. They weren't power driven. It was a softer tone. Even those wild cats like Murray the K, Scott Muni, all top 40 jocks were now moving to the FM side of the dial and really whispering it and letting the records play out. Plus, we weren't getting the hiss on the records, and we were hearing stereo recordings for the first time. I'll never forget when I heard years later when Zachary, the great Gould Zachary, radio, dropped the needle on Rubber Soul and played that stereo version with that skipped intro of "I'm Looking Through You."
Right.
And I couldn't believe my ears. I'd never heard a natural Beatles sound that I was familiar with not go the right way in perfect quality. And I drove him nuts because I called, and I finally, after a week or two, got him on the phone. I drove him nuts. I really mean I drove him, that poor man, crazy over this. And the reason I'm saying it so profound that it was crazy to him was, to him, he was a DJ that couldn't give a rat's ass. A Rubber Soul album and an album cover. It was nothing special. He wasn't handed an acetate and told not to say anything. He just played the record that was in front of him and doesn't know what I'm talking about. So that was fun. But it's funny, when I was in that warehouse there at Warner Electric Atlantic, my ears were open to everything that was going on at Top 40 Radio, WABC, WNBC. and the records that were driving up those charts. And, they weren't friendly to my ears. There were a few I liked, but I was really an FM guy. So it was a tough task to be asked to work the top 40 songs in New York City at the time. I really expected to come out of the elevator at WABC and go into a room of guys that looked like the Beach Boys, that wanted good vibrations, incense, talked about records they liked, B-sides, what concerts they were going to. And I walked out of the elevator, and it was like off-track betting on a bad day. It was, it was like a bunch of goons in raincoats with 2-inch thick glasses that were real brutes, and real bulls, and they were talking about records in a way that I never understood before. They were talking about chart numbers and sales, and not about the sound or the group. So there was a real identification problem there. So when I walked in, it was really tough going. I really went out of my way to mention in my book about Tommy James's book, The Mob, The Music and Me. Tommy talked about being ripped off by the mob in the music business, never being paid. And in one chapter, he ends it with saying, by 1974, and that's when I entered the door, things had changed, and it wasn't like that. And I was lucky because I was a fan previous at WABC, as we all were growing up and listening to those playlists and those great years. So when I met Rick Sklar, I was a fan, and he was a business guy that was making huge ABC corporate decisions during the day with a suit and a tie, handling the air staff, the account managers, everything. He was a very, very powerful man, and the last thing he wanted to do was get caught by these goons talking records that were coming up the charts. That's why Rick had a music director.
Yeah.
But when I met him, and I talked about the Beatles and all kinds of fun stuff, the Mona Lisa contest, the biggest Mona Lisa, the littlest Mona Lisa, all those crazy contests. He was really open to saying, sit down, I thought of that. Let me tell you more. I'm the guy behind the scenes. I'm the Wizard of Oz. I pull the strings. And then he'd play me a tape, and he'd say, now listen to this. He says, this is the tape where we made all the ABC Beatle commercials. And he'd say, I'll put the tape on and you'll be able to hear it. And he started the tape, and it'd be Rick speaking, and he'd say, WABC, the Beatles are the best. WABC, the Beatles are the best. And he'd whisper, WABC, home of the Beatles. WABC, he'd have the jock doing it. And he was so entertaining to me. So at that time, I had to get back into those top 40 records. And when I had to examine each playlist, I had to figure out how many R&B records they were playing, how many pop records they were playing, how many duets they were playing, and how my record could fit in with them. And what even made my job mentally tougher was the first record I promoted. I wanted it to be like a Chuck Berry, a Little Richard, a classic song that's on every jukebox known to man. And it was Midnight at the Oasis by Maria Mulder. It made me choke. That was not an easy record to bring to a record. Having a night in the desert on a waterbed wasn't the music he was playing at the time. So that really opened up my mind to how to work that and work Rick. And I had such fun experiences in my life. I just want to tell you two quick funny ones. One was one time the guy that taught me how to do the job, he had that song Dueling Banjos, and Rick listened to it, and it was too slow and it went too long. So my friend Mike, he took it and he sped it up to about 48 RPMs to make sure it would fit. So they were playing it like Mickey Mouse. And when the two artists came up to play it in his office, Rick started tapping his feet, saying, "Come on, boys, pick it up. This doesn't sound like the record." So those were fun times.
Dave, let me ask you about that the "How Do You Do It" story in the book.
Sure.
I mean, that's such a great story. I mean, you didn't have any idea when John pulled out that record that that's what he was going to play.
No. I'll take it over here. First off, being a kid and reading the authorized biography of the Beatles by Hunter Davies, that was quite a book. That was a must read a really happening book. Great stuff. It's the first time the words Beatles, smoking pot were really put in print and truthful. And nobody ever said that before. There's not any mention of that in any text I ever read until that book. And in that book, he took you through so many stages, the early days with Sutcliffe and the letters that he had, all the way to how they wrote a song together with a little help from my friends. He was a witness to that and wrote it beautifully and stunningly. And it was in that book that he talked about the How Do You Do It song. And it was in my mind, and I'd always hear Jerry and the Pacemakers wondering, I thought the Jerry and the Pacemakers did it great. And I thought the Beatles must have done it exactly like that. So, I was thinking about this earlier when I wrote the book, to think that the day in our lives, it happened to me and Ron, even to Derek Taylor, maybe he had plans, but we certainly, when I woke up that morning, couldn't have imagined I'd be sitting on John Lennon's bed, turning him on in a great mood that he was in that evening. He had just had Walls and Bridges in his hand, and was showing it to us how it opened up, and we talked about it at length. He got up and he played Number 9 Dream really loud, like we weren't allowed to play records loud, but this was his record at his place, and he cranked it, and it washed over us like a tidal wave of a wall of music that sounded tremendous to us. And it's funny, when he came out of that song, I had the courage and strength to say to him, "Who produced that?" And he said, "I did." "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, geez, I gotta be honest with you. It doesn't sound anything like Pussycats or Mind Games." I thought those were really thinner and tinnier. I mean, this had a real full sound. And then he said, I felt bad, but he got defensive and said that he had made those for AM stereo, that he was mixing them for AM stereo, that he thought was going to be the next big thing. But what really rolled this along, and it doesn't get talked about a lot, and I should have done a better job about it, was that you have to consider something. John Lennon wasn't with Yoko Ono, and I'd been with him and Yoko several times. Let's call it several times. And when she was around him, she was an intellectual woman who wasn't really interested in a kid talking to John about rock and roll. That wasn't her scene. And it could end abruptly with her. But he was with May, and she wasn't even with us on the bed. And so when John was talking about the new rock and roll album that he'd been working on, we were just really intense about what songs he chose and everything about rock and roll. And there was no stopping John. There was no Yoko to turn it off, man. He was full on. Now, consider this. He's full on talking about these records and these artists. And I didn't know anything about Larry Williams, really. And he told us all about Larry Williams, Dizzy Miss Lizzy, Slow Down, Bad Boy, Tony Maroney. I mean, wow, this guy's not even in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And the influence on John Lennon is enough. But, of course, we had the Washington Coliseum movie. And John got so turned on by this movie, he just was lit. The night was young. He had new music, and this is when he said, look at this. And he pulls out this acetate, an envelope that was all like pizza stained, dirty, a big yellow manila envelope, and inside of that was a cleaner one, and inside of that was this acetate. Now, what was strange was, I forgot to mention, but right before he played Number 9 Dream, he said his stereo wasn't working. And Ron said, "I'll fix it," and he got up and fixed it. And John was so happy. Even you or I would be happy if somebody came in and fixed your damn stereo. Even if you didn't have nothing. It's like getting the TV to work. So John was really happy. And when we were showing him the movies, just one last sidecar. You guys there?
Yeah.
I was there.
It's Al's train.
When we were showing the movie, John said, "What else have you got?" And Ron started talking about Elvis Presley stuff. And John Lennon had never seen these Elvis clips in England, so to actually have them and speak about them was just, you guys are coming back. And the other key thing about Ron, again, we touched on, was he was a young teenager, unable to drive. And Ron Fermanak worked in these oldie stores down in the Village, and he had like 50 records with picture sleeves before 1964. So when he was with John Lennon, he wasn't a dazed out kid with a pencil and a pad, pushing it in his face for an autograph. He was down and dirty with every one of those records that John talked about or knew about. So there was either us sharing or John sharing, and all of us in the kitty together like a heavy card game. And it was at this point that John, turned us on and began to tell us about how do you do it, and how the Beatles that George Martin had found the record, wanted them to record it. John didn't want to record it. And when he was telling me the story, I was kind of pushing back mentally because I was wondering, why is he not like, I love that record. What's he pushing back for? Then he'd say he didn't think Beatle fans, at the Cavern would like it. Now, I wasn't a Beatle fan at the Cavern to know what they'd like or not like, or that they were in leather and more bluesy. To me, this was a great song. But he said, no, we really didn't like it, and I didn't sing it to the best of my ability. And at that point, he dropped that needle, and man, it was unbelievable to hear it and to open, it's again, like wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, look at him and say, I'm looking at John Lennon, and he's playing it, and I'm really here, and I'm hearing it.
Mm-hmm. I mentioned this on the show before. Our local station here in the Bay Area played it, the years before it got released on the anthology, decades, at least a decade before. And I remember sitting in my car waiting for it to come on. And it was amazing. Allan, I'm sorry I got in front of you. I didn't mean
No,
to.
that's okay.
Yeah. Did you have a question you wanted to hit Dave with?
I had some observations. I've got to say that for someone who doesn't know the ins and outs of the way the music industry works, this is a really thin book, 107 pages, but it takes you right in there, and totally apart from the Beatles stuff, which is great, and turns up very frequently in the book, and is stories like Dave just told about showing John the Washington Coliseum film and hearing how do you do it. I mean, apart from that, there are things in here like Dave talks about taking notes at the early meetings about what a promo guy is supposed to do. And Dave, I think those are like all your notes, right, that are in the book.
Yes.
It's like a complete...
I deliberately put those in there to bore the hell out of everyone.
No. I mean, I don't know. Maybe a normal...
at the end of the meeting, which would then lead you to the breath of fresh air seeing the Crawdaddy magazine with John Lennon. It was stupendously a massive headache. And I'd wish that I was back in the warehouse just picking and packing records and getting free tickets.
Yeah, but you know what? For someone who's sort of interested in the way the record industry works, and I mean, I knew an awful lot of these guys, apart from you, but I never really sort of knew what their job entailed. And those notes, I mean, it's a total course in 1970s record promotion. So I'm glad you included it, even if you thought it was going to bore people. It was just great. And the other thing, there's this great suspense. I mean, I'm getting to like the last couple of pages of the book, and I'm saying, man, he's mentioned this Christmas bonus about 15 times, and he's not going to tell us what it is until like the last page. So, yeah, good. Structurally, Dave, got to tell you, good book.
Yeah. Thank you. I really got wound up when I found the memorabilia to make this, to put this in 1 year.
Yeah.
And end it. I thought, geez, this is just, I got everything I need. And that ending with being at the ball game in L.A., seeing John, and then that bonus, because I found the letter. And, I wanted professional help in my writing. I wanted everybody to laugh. I'm not a comedic writer. I'm not even a writer. I'm just trying to put out the best I can do with the tools I've got. And I hope to do better. I really do. But with that in mind, there's a couple of guys that are really famous out here that are comedians, and I happen to know them, and I said, I got to get together with you. I need a punched up end here. I really want people to laugh. And they said, oh, meet me for coffee. And I said, yeah, I got this idea. It feels good, but I don't think I got the firecracker. And he goes, let's see what you got. This is good. Use that. And I'd say, oh, really? And then, I went to another guy, and I'd say, I know, I'll pay you. Just one joke, like Bob Hope. He paid for jokes. And the guy said, no, you got it. So thank you, Allan, for saying that.
So how many more volumes are you going to do? How far are you going to take it?
That's a great question. And first, I want to say that, truthfully and honestly, I had the structure of Horse Dog and built and done, and it was really a part one, and I wasn't going to end it there, but I had to. So that's why it was a thinned out volume 1, and then this volume 2. You know, there's massive stuff, and plus, I had worked very hard and diligently in providing a huge new kind of book that I wanted to present to everybody that had audio in it, with me and John talking. I wanted it to have the photographs, but I fell into all those legalities and gray areas, you know. It's very tough. I mean, when you're the Warner Brothers guy, let's say, and Warner Brothers says, you know, hire a photographer to take a picture of you at a radio station with somebody, you know, and then, you know, 40 years later you want to use a book. I don't own that image because I didn't take that picture, even though that guy got paid. So it didn't work for me, but it made me work harder on the book. Now, to bring you guys ahead, I'm very excited because I'm really feeling, if you're interested in the subjects I'm speaking about, of course there'll be less Beatles in a moment in my next book, but then it'll pick up. But let me share this with you. The next book, I finish off my year, I finished in 1975 at Warner Brothers. Having an incredible year there from Fleetwood Mac finally busting after all those years. Rod Stewart with Atlantic Crossing, one of the nicest people you ever want to meet ever, and he loves rock and roll. He knows the clothes he had on, the concert set list. He's a treat to be with, and of course I was with him then. You know, he hadn't gone the way he's gone. People have left him. He was really so great. So that's all in there. Then, you know, I thought it was a clunker, but it wasn't. But I thought the Four Seasons, Who Loves You, was a real clunker, but it wasn't. So I go there. But then, you know, I go to RCA, and RCA is very strict building, almost suit and ties, you know, security cameras on each floor, completely different from the wild townhouse of Warner Brothers. And I remember I was just talking to the guy today, Bruce Sommerfeld, who was the head of A&R, or one of the A&R guys under Mike Berniker, who produced People by Barbra Streisand. I'll never forget that my first day at RCA, I had really long hair, wearing crazy clothes. And he says, Dave, I want you to meet somebody who's going to be so happy and not like you is working for us. Please meet Lou Reed. You know, so like, wow. Yeah. And by the end of the day, I'm telling you, as far as you could swing a pendulum, at 4:00 that afternoon, they said, "Come on up come on upstairs. The executive office. We're having a big party. You know, you're the new guy. Come on up." David Cassidy's there, and he's looking at me, going, "Oh my God, I'm going to have a shot now, getting some FM airplay." So it was so there's that. Now in that year, though, I got into country music in a big way. You know, Dolly Parton, that Outlaws album with Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings was one of the first gold records, or, you know, platinum records in country. It was huge. Hall & Oates breaks. A couple of sidecars break. Vicki Sue Robinson turns the beat around. Dr. Buzzard Savannah Band kicks in. These aren't big names, but underneath all of that texture, you got Lou Reed, you got David Bowie. We're going down a great path here as we roll. And of course, one of my favorite stories is Elvis. The King's last album. And I'll never forget racing this over to Scott Muni and Dennis Elsas, and they wanted to hit me with a 2x4, saying, "We're not playing Elvis Presley as long as I ever live. This guy stinks." And I said, "It's Elvis Presley. Just play it. Say there's a new Elvis album out and let everybody else say that. You're not opinion makers. Drop the needle on the King." Wouldn't do it. It was low down. You know, a year later, he dies. I'm listening to the radio. Scott Muni crying. Lost Elvis. Got his last record here called Low Down. I'm gonna play it now. I wanted to smack him with a 2x4, the nut. So we're gonna meet the King and do the Elvis Boogie, and that was a wonderful thing. And then I moved to Arista, where I meet the triumvirate of nutcases: Patti Smith, Iggy Pop, and Lou again. Hello. How I survived those years, I'll never know. Plus the Grace Dead again. Plus the Kinks again. Thank you.
So does the next volume have Mike McCartney in it?
No, you know, and I'll tell you what's interesting about that name is this. He really wasn't part of that story, part one.
Right.
And to double check that, because I'm not that kind of person, he wasn't part of that whole evening. He really mentally, physically wasn't there. Derek in 50 Years Adrift doesn't even mention, you know, that he signed and brought him on, unless I'm dreaming. You know, there's nothing there. So And in my case, I personally felt that as a young boy who often cut school and went to TV shows, I happened to be at the David Frost show when those guys stumbled out of the taxi cab and recognized them. I mean, what is that? You know? Mm-hmm. And they were happy that they were recognized. Years later, I found out that after Epstein dropped them as management, David Frost took them on as management, and that's how they got the gig. You know, but then, you know, he took a shot at us in his book, and rather than be revengeful, I just felt, you know, it wasn't necessary to bring him in. And no, we won't be talking about him. And thirdly, I want to put it to bed so that everybody feels comfortable about this. I knew who he was, and I knew how good that record was, and I worked that record hard, and I did a great job for that. But I also, and you guys know me, did the same thing for Badfinger, T-Rex, and these were bands that Warner's didn't care about breaking in New York. It was never a national priority. Ronnie Wood was a big part of my book. He might have had the best shot of those four I just mentioned, because he got to go on that promotional tour to at least 6 cities. But Badfinger, 2 albums, no mentions. T-Rex, I love that. Slade, I was a sucker for that stuff. Motley Crue stole it and made a career out of it.
Sure.
Slade, you couldn't talk about Slade you couldn't step out of those rules of breaking artists. And you know, in my book, it's all about Little Feat, Tower Power, which were bands that were forced on me. And if I hadn't worked at Warner's, they would have never gotten on my radar screen. And I'm proud to say they were tremendous records and great bands. And just to finish off Alan's question, because I'm really proud to share this with everybody. I'm really proud. I wish any of you guys were here. I say this totally stand up, no sense of humor. The book on Capitol Records. A decade there.
Oh, yeah.
Fellas, you won't believe what I've got. I mean it. I tape recorded the conference calls. I'm going through them. I'm raging through this, drilling through this cement on a terrific masterpiece. I know you'll like it.
When's that part? When's the Capitol?
That's probably, I'm going to be forced to do this third book. You know, I was really wanted to skip and do the Capitol book because it's so entertaining, but I got to go back and get grounded down by Clive Davis and a few, you know, nutcases out there. So I don't enjoy that, but I've got to tell it at it like I saw it, and so I'm into it. But that's got to come first. So I'm looking at next. I'm surprising myself. I'm hoping I could do 1 a year. So I'm looking at doing 4, and then doing a box set with a 5th volume of all. Tidbits of cool things I thought I could use as bonus chapters when the book went to #1, but of course it hasn't. So the bonus chapters will be used in another fashion.
Bonus chapters. There is a concept of a record business guy writing a book. Bonus chapters.
We'll have to. I'm going to have to remember that.
Yeah, the Capitol. I'm looking forward to the Capitol stuff too, because that's when I met you in like '83 or so.
Yes, it was marvelous meeting you, and you had the tape. You were a great friend, and I don't mean to cut in, but Allan will be a big part of the experience. I needed a witness when I went to Albert Goldman's house.
Oh God!
Who was working on Lennon's book, and I said to myself, I don't believe this is happening. I've got to bring somebody who, when I write about it in the future, they'll make no mistake that the man Alan Kozer from the New York Times to meet this cuckoo magoo.
You got to, wait a minute. You can't just talk about this and drop it off. I don't know what you guys are referring to. You got to tell us.
We spent a pleasant afternoon with Albert.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, before I brought Allan into it, I got a call from Albert Goldman, and he was looking for some research material on Yoko and John. I got the call at Capitol. I knew he was a goon from his Elvis book. I went to meet him. He swore up and down that it was going to be a James Dean, iconic, incredible book, that John had no secrets, and he was really the true rebel. We all it was like Marlon Brando. And he really had a way of bending that, of what he was going to accomplish.
Wait a minute. You're saying Albert Grossman? That's not who you're talking
Goldman.
Albert Goldman.
Goldman, okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. I get confused because I worked with Albert Grossman. I worked with those guys. Anyway, back to Goldman's book. So he obviously, we all know it's a rubber band of Cynthia's book and this book and that book.
Right.
Washed into a hamburger. But at the time when I met him, I saw that he was a guy I wasn't comfortable with. He was Franklin, very curmudgeon. It wasn't easy being around him because his theories weren't working on my brain. So I said clearly, I don't want my name in your book. I don't want to accept any money from you. I'll give you these few things. And he wanted some Yoko clippings. And you know what I had? I found the Everson Art Museum pamphlet from Syracuse. And in it was about 16 little clippings. And rather than hand it to him, I photostated each one like I did 16 research projects for him and handed it to him. Meanwhile, I confronted him and said, listen, what I would like in regards to helping you is the research material. I know you're not a Beatle fan or a John Lennon fan. And he said, okay. And, Allan, I think Allan may have seen some stuff, and we shared some stuff. And, that's what I walked out with. And then, Allan got a chance to meet the big man. And Allan can challenge the best of them. So those two were really arm wrestling over there.
It was kind of fun, yes. And then when the book came out, it was even more fun. I had to interview him. Really? And mentioned the day that we were there and the things that he said and claimed that weren't true. And but it's funny. I mean, the day that I met Dave actually was kind of funny because he was at Capitol, and I had gone up to EMI to interview one of their classical players, since that's what I was writing about. And the classical promo guy had taken this guy out to lunch, and they had a bit too much wine and forgot about the interview. And I'm just sort of sitting there, and his secretary comes out and says, so I'm sorry, is there anything I can help you with? And I said, yeah, when are you going to release Leave My Kitten Alone? And she said, well, I'll tell you what, when Dave Morrell gets back from lunch, I'll introduce you to him. And I said, Dave Morrell? And she said, yeah, Dave Morrell, he's our pop promo guy. And so I was introduced to Dave, and the first thing I said to Dave was, were you on the Howard Smith show when you were like 15? Because it was it was, talk about a weird small world, I mean, I listened to that show when it was on, taped it, But, yeah, so... I'm looking forward to the Capitol stuff, obviously, because that puts you right in the orbit of several fabs.
Yes. And it'll bring, and by the way, I really want to write a righteous, truthful, unbelievable story, how, in order of the Butcher cover, and, what happens in Paul and being with him that day and showing it to him. And he was flipped out seeing the Beatle Butcher cover that John had signed. He really marveled at the sight of it. Absolutely, yeah. He was great.
Yeah. Dave, you talk in the book about the Let It Be tapes. Talk about that story too.
Sure. Richard DeLello, who wrote The Longest Cocktail Party, stopped up at Warner Brother Records one day. I heard his name being announced at the reception desk, and he was going up to see Joe. Joe Bergman worked at Warner Brother Records in the Artist Relations Department, and before she joined us, she had worked with Tony Barrow, the Beatles PR agent, in the earliest days of the Beatles. She knew Epstein, all those people. She has Tony Barrow's 1963 desk diary. She has some incredible memorabilia that's incredible that nobody's seen before. It's been in a trunk that she sits on for 50 years. She has a blanket on her trunk, and that's her chair. She went on to work with the Rolling Stones. You can see her throughout the movie Give Me Shelter. She's the key person in the Rolling Stones organization, Joe Bergman. And when I met her at Warner Brothers, we hit it off great. And within that 1 year that I wrote the book, because of her, I met Neil Aspinall, Derek Taylor, John Kosh, who designed all the some of the covers, Ethan Russell, who photographed him in the end, and then Richard DeLello. And he was a scary guy. He was like an Eric Roberts in the Pope of Greenwich Village, really high-wired and speedy and scary. But once we hit it off, he was one of the most gentle, wonderful guys I ever met. And I brought Ron Fermanak with me to say, we got to go meet Richard DeLello. He's got all these pictures from Apple. He had Agnes McBean, these color positive negatives, about 5 by 7 inches, of the Beatles leaning over the railing in the future shot with these different velour suits that weren't the picture that I'd seen before, the striped suit. They were solid color, and it was gorgeous. And he gave me one. We made a beautiful light box out of it. He had photographs he had taken of Ringo. He was on set for the Instant Karma video. He signed White Trash. He was on the roof with Badfinger. So we went to his house up in Suffern, New York, and he was hanging with Andy Dalton, who was David Dalton's wife, and another woman named Margot. And as we were talking, he said, check out this box. And he had these 5- and 7-inch tapes. And he had a tape recorder, and we put it on, and I really almost fainted. I'd never heard in a human being's home, never mind a recording studio, recordings of this superior quality of the Beatles. And some of the reels were at 1 7/8, which was very slow, but they were still incredible. There was so much packed on them. Some were 3 3/4, and some were 7 1/2, and the quality was beyond. And he was very gracious in saying that we could copy these. And for several years, I'm not kidding, I'm not saying days and I'm not saying months, I'm saying years, at least 3 to 4 years, we would just listen to these and try to make sense of them. Whenever I got a cold, I'd lay on the couch and put the tape on and just, nod off with the Beatles for 7 hours kind of stuff.
Sure.
And we began to understand, we started to look at it like, what if we were Phil Spector and were handed this? Let's see, because obviously it seemed to us that Phil Spector didn't go very far in listening to anything. He was probably given the best of the lot and made the best out of that. But we found clippings and bits and other songs and them having fun, and we thought we could create our own album. So we did find better versions of all the songs he chose and put them in that order, or what we thought were better, we don't know. And then we did an album of takes that we thought were the greatest, and then we picked stuff that we thought nobody had ever heard. And we ended our album with Paul saying, it's all very funny, the Beatles broke up because Yoko sat on an amp. Click. That's how we were going to end it. And now, I know there's so much material out. I still think there's an album's worth of great material in there, fun stuff with the Beatles in a great positive mood. And I hope Paul opens it up and reevaluates that material one day.
Mm-hmm. So did he have the entire set of Nagra reels?
That would be a question for Ron, who had. They weren't Nagra reels. They were another brand. So I'm thinking.
But it's that material, right? I mean.
Yes. What we were told at the time was that David Dalton. Thank you for bringing that up. David Dalton was in charge with another guy, David Dalton, and I'll think of it in a moment. But when the Beatles were doing the Let It Be book that came with the album, it was out in England and Canada. There was dialogue in the book,
right?
And so they were given these tapes to go through and to do the dialogue. As a matter of fact, here's a newie for you, but I was told this years and years ago. I never saw it in print. But John Kosh and Ethan Russell, who designed the book and photographed the book, they said that originally the idea was that John would be in red ink, Paul would be in blue ink, so when you read the book, it wouldn't say John's talking, Paul's talking, it would just be in these color inks. And so that's where all of these tapes came from. And also, it's funny, each page in the Let It Be booklet is a single page with photographs, but in the center of the book is the only picture that's a double truck fold, the whole size, and it's Yoko passed out under the piano. They did that deliberately.
Interesting. Yeah, that book was funny because I don't know about yours, but I think the bindings on all of them fell apart.
Yeah, I think so.
Hard to find one sealed on that one. And a real quick tidbit to the end of Richard. Richard came out to California, lives in Bel Air, and wrote Popeye Doyle, the follow-up to the French Connection. Mm-hmm. And he did very well for himself. And, he even did one of the Michael Jackson videos. I think Bad was one of his that he might have written.
Mm. Yeah, you mentioned a couple of the things that he had done, and I was surprised because I wasn't aware that he had done that stuff. I was going to ask you, and I don't want to get too far off the subject since we're basically talking about Beatles, but when you talk about Warner Brothers, you mentioned you were with Ron Wood for I've Got My Own Album to do with George, which George is on.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful album. But I have to ask, because I was a big Faces fan, did you ever work with the Faces?
Oh, my God. One of my favorite groups in the whole wide world. Yeah. Oh, man. They were so much fun. And that's why I said when I met Rod Stewart, I said to him, hey, last time, one of the gigs I saw at the Faces was in Jersey City at the Stanley Theater. He goes, I remember it. I go, I'm not even done talking yet. Hold on. He goes, no, I remember that show. We did 2 shows there. I said, yeah. And I said, you told the audience at the first crowd if they wanted to stay. And he goes, yeah, go upstairs. You could stay for free. I go, yeah, I was at that show. He goes, yeah, I remember it. I was wearing these red shoes, these blue socks. I had on these yellow pants. I said, come on. So the Faces were really big in my life. And what's really funny was, as I mentioned to you guys about, there's all of us with our own personalities and records we love and we want to push. Mm-hmm. And we know that the guy that we're pushing records on would want to know this information. Mm-hmm. So I was so fortunate that the guy that was doing the albums was on vacation and I was in charge. And because of that record, having Mick Jagger on it and George Harrison on it, I was able to go to Scott Muni Things from England and nudge my way in the door. And plus with Dennis Elsis, who, liked Emmett, what was Emmett's name? Emmett Rhodes.
Oh,
sure. Kind of Beatles sound.
Oh, yeah.
I knew he might give me a shot on this. And I was a young kid, and I played it off of, George Harrison and Mick Jagger. And I think Rod Stewart was on it, too. And so he fell in, he said, yeah, now you can come by, and now we'll play the record. And what's so funny is, I didn't put it in the book, but that evening, Ronnie had a videotape, and I think I did put it in the book, and it was of Warner Brothers had paid for him to do one solo show in England, and he got Rod Stewart to come on. And I don't know if they ever showed it, but, we had it that night and looked at it. It was a lot of fun to be. It's always a lot of fun to be with artists when they're watching themselves on the screen and critiquing it that way. That was a ball, Ron, and the Faces.
There was one show, I saw the Faces several times, but there was one show I'll never forget in Berkeley. I don't know if you were at that show, Dave, at the Berkeley Community Theater. In the middle of, I think it was Plinth, when Ronnie Wood was doing his solo, Rod Stewart and Ronnie Lane went backstage and they came out with this big sheet and they unfurled it and it was the Holiday Inn flag they had stolen. That was fantastic. That was fantastic. I was going to also ask you to give me the worst record you ever had to promote. How did you deal with it?
Wow. There were many of them, and certainly I really believe. I know it's hard to say because it was such a hit, but that Midnight at the Oasis was tough to swallow. It just, I even went out of my way in the book to write about it. How Rolling Stone, John Landau, who was a writer then, thought it was jazzy. Another key writer thought it was bluesy. In other words, I'm enabling myself to hear people who have credibility that are reviewers unable to come to a point with it. Mm-hmm. And it was a conservative year that year. The Sister Mead had a record. It was Brian McGregor, a song about Americans. Yeah. It was a real turning point at that time, and WABC played it very strict. Now, Maria Moldauer, first off, Greenwich Village in a jug band, sure. That wasn't my scene. And she was like a Bonnie Raitt, this kind of hip girl, just wearing tie-dyed cut-off kind of stuff, barefoot and swiveling her hips, doing these big Mama Thornton songs.
Wasn't she from Jim Kweskin Jug Band?
Yes, she was.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Okay.
And her, she was so good-looking and sexy, like the Carly Simon covers. That played into it. And she had songs like "It Ain't the Meat, It's the Motion." So these were kind of racy, Betty Boop-ish tracks, and so that one was really hard to swallow. But I had a million clunkers, guys. But it's interesting to say this because I was always worried I'd be confronted of, Dave, what do you think? And I got to tell you, nobody ever asked me, what do you think? So I was never in a bind. To be responsible for liking.
Probably because they were used to seeing those guys with the 2-inch thick glasses and the trench coats coming to promote them.
And I don't want to bad rap this other guy, and he'll be in my next book, but Barry Manilow, some of those records, Weekend in New England.
You're talking a sensitive topic in my household.
Listen, I worked at the Copa, which was a great song, but Barry was very flamboyant, really loved to show off. And the night Clive gave me that record and say, spend a weekend only playing this record, I was like, whoa, okay. But
this may be the only time we talk about Barry Manilow on the show.
Probably.
Oh my God! Because I hate to admit this, and I'm going to admit it, but my wife and my sister-in-law were huge fans of Manilow, and we saw him at that period. We paid, I think it was $20, which was pretty high in those days, and we saw him. I think it was around the Copacabana time, Dave. He played Circle Star. I don't know if you remember Circle Star Theater out here.
I do.
Yeah, he played Circle Star Theater, and we saw that show. And I think it was Circle Star. I'm pretty sure. But anyway, we saw that show at the time, and it was. I remember that very well. But anyway,
Yeah.
Allan, I've been talking a lot. You guys got anything else?
Actually, I do. Dave, you just mentioned Clive. Now, I know you were based on on the East Coast when you were with WEA, or I guess Warner's technically. But did you ever have any connection at all with Joe Smith? The recently passed High Mucky Muck at Warner's.
Joe Smith was a DJ,
right,
in Boston. And so he had that very flamboyant, happy, slap me five, always smiling, always in a good mood. When I got to Warner Brothers, this was the early days of film or video, probably video, and they'd send a videotape of Joe Smith like Cal Worthington selling cars on a car lot. On each car window, on the windshield, was an album from either Tower Power, Randy Newman, Gordon Lightfoot, those kind of things. And he did a stand-up routine that was out of this world. Nothing could have been funnier. And he embraced me. He came to the townhouse. He knew Rick Sklar. He knew the artist. He was one of the few leaders I worked for that walked the walk as I did. He had been there. Many presidents of record companies, some of them came from sales, and they think promotion people are just airheads talking all the time, as I'm talking all the time. You get a president of a company that comes from press and publicity, so that then when you get a Paul McCartney, they're going to be driven to go that way with the artist. And then you get a guy that was coming from radio who really knew the importance of the radio, and Joe was that guy. And when you're with Joe Smith and you're around artists like Frank Sinatra, which I didn't even put in my book, you're an amazing heir. And here I am with hair down on my shoulders, meeting Frank Sinatra. You got to say something about that. I'll tell you right now. We had to go meet him at the secret door of the Waldorf Astoria, where he comes down from, because he was living there, and he wanted to go over to WNEW, where he had once worked. He knew William B. Williams,
sure,
and he knew everybody. And this is the old NEW, where it was like when he was there on Fifth Avenue, and he was playing for the main event, this big live concert in Madison Square Garden. So here he comes down, and he meets me with Joe Smith. He goes, "You got to be kidding me. You got to be kidding me." And he sees that really long hair. He goes, "Wow, hop in." So we get in the limousine, and he's with Jilly. Jilly owned the restaurant on 55th Street, his guy. So Frank says, "Hey, Jilly, fix this kid a drink. What are you drinking?" I said, "I'll have a wine." Wine? Jilly, fix this kid a drink. It's scotch and soda that I can't even sip it without. It's like trying to smoke a cigarette in front of your parents and choking crazy like a horse. And we go over to the radio station, and William B. He walks in on William B. And William B. goes, "Frank, give me a second. I'm finishing up here." He goes, "What? I'm here. Stop. I'm not. I'm walking in. I'm talking. Don't stop me." He goes, "No, listen. We're giving away this honeymoon gift for these kids. They've been sending in pictures of where they're going to go on their honeymoon. We're calling this girl. She won. She's going to be telling her husband. Hold on." So they go, "We're calling," and the phone's ringing, and this girl goes, "Hello?" And they go, "Hi, William B. Williams calling. You've won the contest for a honeymoon for two. And I know when you get married next month, your husband's really going to love this." She goes, "Hold on, he's right here." He's in bed with her. So Sinatra goes, "Hang on, no, hang up on that bitch. Let's move this along." So it's 10-2, and William B. Williams goes, "Frank, let me finish this up. 2:00 we go to news. We'll start it up. Let's start you on at 2:15. Goes, 2:15. I'm out of here. Start it now. By the time we get back to the Waldorf Astoria, Frank says to me, "Hey, listen, here's 2 tickets. I want to see your mother, not you. You understand me? I said, yeah, I got it. So, really
That's
fun.
wonderful. That's great.
Thanks for
That's
letting me share that. I didn't know that was coming up tonight.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Alan, you got something else you want to ask him?
Yeah, I guess I'm just focused on some of the stuff that's going to be in the Capitol book, but I guess I'll have to wait for that. And what year did you say that was going to come out? Is it going to come out before Lewison's next month?
Yeah. I've actually that's funny, and I'm actually a third of the way through it. I know where the end zone is on this one, and it's a beauty, man. I really mean this, and I hope I'm able to articulate. Everything that went on there. You got to imagine, we walked into a big scene there. There was some big records, and, McCartney came back to the label, Tina Turner, Duran, Bob Seger. It's unbelievable, the big hits that we had there in that decade. And the ending I put on this book is a corker, boys.
Great. When did you move west?
Oh, it's funny. I was working at Sony Red Ink. I put in a good 5 years, and I'd actually fallen in love with this woman named Judy, who I had met at Capitol Records when I joined them in 1980. But I was the New York guy. She was the West Coast gal. She worked at Capitol in the Tower 33 years. Mm-hmm. So, we hooked up, and I knew I wanted to come to California. And I've been with Judy now for 10 years. I love it out here, fellas. Your nose doesn't get cold. Your ears don't get cold. You don't have to buckle up your jacket in the front.
Well, maybe not in L.A. you don't, Dave.
There you go. Right. Mark Twain, or the coldest winter I ever felt was a summer in San Francisco.
There you go. And actually, I know Judy. I've worked with Judy. When Judy was at Capitol, I worked with her when I was in the newspaper, and I know, and she's handling the book now. So
yes, she's quiet and shy, but fellas, and she's behind the scenes as I was, being a promotion man behind the bands and kept my distance. But the archives that she has, the day she started at Capitol, Ringo and John were there. That just gives you a clue that stuff, and. It's thrilling, and I also want to finish by saying, or not finish, but say that Allan picked up on that promotion man thing, and I always felt that when I was writing this book, there were books about A&R people, books about artists, but I hadn't seen anything, from the promotion man perspective, and I wanted to go deep and really share it and get it out there, and and I'm glad that I did, and it's understood, and people get a real feel for the gig.
Yeah, definitely.
We're just about out of time, but Dave, I wanted to ask if you would do a real short Beatles story that maybe give a taste of what people can expect for a Beatles story in the next book.
Okay, I'll give you a great one. And I think, Allan, I'm sorry if I'm sawing your ear off. You've been with me and a great pal my whole ride, and I love you very much. You've always been a great supporter. But I'll never forget the day at Capitol. This is so funny. I think it was Press to Play came out. We were having a party for Paul and Linda at Radio City Music Hall. Mm-hmm. And you could feel the commotion of the photographers and the press people pressing, no pun intended, as Paul was entering. So I was kind of relaxed and in the back, and I was standing with Basker Menon, who was their chairman, and Don Zimmerman, the president, a couple of bigwigs. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, McCartney came upon us. There was no time to say he's walking towards us. He was upon us. And Basker and Don were recognized immediately by Paul. Immediately. It was unbelievable to share that, where Paul says, "Hi, guys," not like people going, "Hi, Paul." It was so great. And they went out of their way to say, "Paul, this is Dave Morrell. He works for us. He's in New York, and he's a big Beatle fan, and he loves the new album." And McCartney darts his whole body, shifted his leg weight, shifted himself, and looked at me and said, "Dave, nice to meet you. What song you like off the new album? One of the deeper tracks. What do you like?" And I'm standing with Basker Menon, so I said, "Move over, Basker." And he goes, "Move over, Busker."
That's good.
And then he started to tell me about, it's a song about busking in the subways in England. And it was really fun. And then I let him do his thing. And Linda was with Danny Fields, who she'd known through
Okay.
16 magazine, and
Mm-hmm.
and he was a wonderful dear, and I use that word in capital letters, dear friend of hers. Lillian Roxon, there was a whole scene there with the press, her being a photographer, and I was watching this go down, and then Linda says, "Hey, anybody got anything rolled?" And I had one with me, so I said, "Yeah." So with me and her and Danny, I have Polaroids of this. I've had my Polaroid camera. It was just the three of us. We went up to the balcony at Radio City Music Hall. We're puffing away. And she stood there gazing at the screen. Nobody in the whole place. And she goes, "Oh, boy, when I was a young girl, I loved coming here. Oh, boy, Dave, were you ever here?" I said, "Yes, once. I saw a movie here." "Oh, what movie was it, Dave?" I said, "The Yellow Rolls Royce." She says, "What a piece of shit." I said, "Well, I like that movie." She goes, "Oh, all right." She says, "Hey, I'm really stoned. Let's go downstairs now." So she's got me by the arm and Danny on the other arm, and we walk over to the table where Paul is. And Paul looks up at her and goes, "Oh, Linda's got the munchies." All right. Linda, bring young Dave and sit right here. So it was Paul, Linda, and me. And then, some big wigs. And, I was paranoid now. I'm stoned, and there's, I'm not supposed to be, and I'm at this table. And so Paul goes, "So what's happening, Dave?" And I said, "Well, I just noticed in the new Capitol catalog that the Beatles, I don't know if it's Sessions or Rarities, I'll get my notes right, and it's coming out." And he goes, No. I said, No, it's so far coming out. It's in the catalog. The salesmen are selling it. He goes, "What's on it?" I go, "Well, I'm the Walrus, take 20. Take 20? Who picked take 20? I said, "I don't know." He says, "Why take 20? I said, "I don't know." He says, "Geez, well, I'll tell you something. You ought to, the final version was the one, man. The final version was the one. I don't know about that one." I said, "Okay." I said, "What about songs that, we heard about, but, that we've heard about you wrote, but we never heard you do it?" He goes, "Like what?" I go, "Come and Get It." I said, "That sounds exactly like Badfinger. Exactly." He goes, "That's right. I told the boys, do it exactly this way. You'll have a hit." Exactly. I said, "Oh, okay, good one." So I said, "What about songs that no one has ever heard before?" He says, "Name one." I said, "That means a lot." And all of a sudden he puts his fingers by his neck, like it's turkey neck, and he's pulling on it. And he goes, "Can't you see?" He goes, "Rubbish. I wouldn't want anyone to hear that one." And then he said, "When you go home tonight, go listen to all of these songs, the final versions of I'm the Walrus, man. That's the one." And he was so charming and turned on. And then, when the moment was really righteous. Now, man, I'm working at the record company, and I can't jump in on stuff, and ask for autographs. I can't do that. I'm a professional. But I yanked out that Butcher cover, and he goes, "Wow." He said, "If I hadn't seen the signature on here," and he's pointing to Lennon, "I'd nick this off you." He says, "I haven't seen one of these in years." And I said, "Would you sign it for me?" He said, "Sure." And I got a nice picture of him signing it. So that's a nice treasure story that I'll share with you. And then I got to work with him on that world tour and be with him a lot, talk to him about Astrid and Hamburg. So I'll be sharing that too.
Oh man, I don't know about you guys, but I don't want this to end. But I think we've about run out of time.
Well, they're closing El Pescatore Veneto here on 56th Street. Now picking up the tab as we have our final.
There we go.
Martin.
Al, you got any last thing you want to jump in with?
No, I think we probably should wrap it up.
Yeah, really, Dave. Thank you very, very much. One of these days we're going to get Ron in here.
Absolutely.
He was dying to do it. I'll close by saying he was dying to do it. He's got a million great stories in the Naked City. He's toppermost of the poppermost. He blew my mind once again last week with the things he's up to and what he's doing. I don't want to share it. It's his ownership. And he really wanted to be on here tonight, and I'll be talking to him in a moment. And I just want to say to Allan Kozin, man, it's been a long time, and I love you, and your giggle and your funness is always with me. And Al, I could sit and talk with Al chair to chair for 10 days and never come up for breath. And
we had a great visit at the LA Fest for Beatles fans about, I guess now, a little over a year ago, and it was as quick and enjoyable a half hour or so as I think I've ever had there. It was so much fun.
Thank you. And Steve, you're the best. I love working with you, reading your material. You've been such a great supporter to Dave Morrell. I really owe you one, and I'm very grateful to be on the show today, fellas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Glad to have you.
Very much. Yeah, it's been great to have you. And like I said, I wish this could go on for another hour or two. But anyway, folks, this has been Things We Said Today. Al, you want to give out some contact information?
Just through Twitter at ASUS, ASUSS 49, or on Facebook at Al Sussman, where, as I mentioned, you're likely almost at any time to suddenly see a survey from Corvettes from 1972 pop up, courtesy of Dave Morrell.
Okay, Allan, you.
Oh, probably the easiest way to get to me is Facebook, either Allan Kozinn or my alter ego, Allan Kozinn Remixed. Or you can send me an email at allankozinn@gmail.com.
And for me, I have my own Facebook page. You can email me at BeatlesExaminer@gmail.com. You can email the show at thingswesaiddtodayRadioshow@gmail.com. We also have 2 Facebook pages, a group page and a radio show page, and you can contact us on Twitter at thingswesaidfab. And so we will see you all next week, same place. You can get us on Podbean, on YouTube, on iTunes. We are everywhere. Take us with you to the gym, which I have done several times, and it's a lot of fun to hear us. Who knows what we'll have next week, but we will be back with you. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we will see you next time.